Hello guys, and this probably will be the first video on the channel in terms of me actually talking about the stuff that I left in the description of the channel. So as an active infantry in the ongoing full-scale war with Russia, I don't think it's of course just an invasion, and you probably all know that, because the reasons for that and the front lines is just too big for it to be an operation or so-called invasion, full-scale invasion or whatever. It's just straight up war with Russian Federation, of course caused by Russian Federation. So today we'll talk about the reasons behind the Russian-Ukrainian war, or war on Ukraine, and why did Russia commit to it, what were the reasons. Of course, in my opinion, how I see them, how I understand them from just being Ukrainian, living in Ukraine for my whole life, and from, of course, being an active infantry in this ongoing war. So if you think about the reasons why Russia did commit to it and what was the main reasoning behind it, why they put so much resources into it, how they prepared, what they were doing, you of course can see a pattern of this being a long-term plan, and a plan that existed really long ago. And why and how they committed to it, you can also see those signs and signatures of how they were preparing and how they were doing it. So if you think about it, of course, in the world there are basically geopolitical households like the United States, China, European Union, and certain European countries themselves like Germany, France, United Kingdom. And as you can see, there's always this forces which are counter to each other, or like big enemies, big households, and the bigger they are, the more they want, not to say control, but influence. Of course, every government tends to over control and do things like that. It's just the heart of the government, or how they function, and pretty much I don't know if we can escape from that in the foreseeable future. But the main thing is, like, there's always these forces which are fighting for influence. They fighting for the control over certain things and processes in the world. Why? Because of course it's a resource race, it's a money race, it's everything race. And Russia, of course, being one of those forces, not as big as they are talking about and not as influential as they may think, but in a kind of way like really old and barbaric. Because if you look on all the methods that they use, how they operate, it's just obvious they come from, very old school doctrine, like communist doctrine, imperialistic Russia doctrine, and all this kind of stuff. They operate from the back, so basically dragging the whole world back into the dark ages, so to say, if you may refer to it in that way. So what they want, of course, is influence. They want to be big, they want to be a force to reckon with, on like political arenas, on war arenas, or any other arenas, sorry, and of course in many other areas. And that's what they like stand for, what they show, that like, hey, how Russia is big, how Russia is cool, and everything like that. But the Russia is basically an ancestor of USSR, and the moment it collapsed, they actually had the plans to reinstate the USSR Union. And the reason for that is because it's been a really big force, and the force to reckon with, whatever you may think about it. And of course, I'm really opposed to all those communist stuff and all this autoritarism and things like that, because I just lived in Ukraine. Of course, I was born in independent Ukraine, but my father's grandfathers and my family has lived through USSR, and it's been an ugly experience. It's nothing I would recommend anyone to go through, and it's deeply rooted for me to oppose those things. And of course, if you look at Russia and think of Russia as a communist country, as an authoritarian country, and you can see they not doing really good, especially the people living there. Whatever they may say to you that it's great and it's super, and you can see Ukraine always intended to distance itself from it and kind of move more towards Western things, the Western signs of things, or how people do it in the West. Let's say more modern way, more up to date, and in my opinion, more humanitarian, or the human side of the spectrum in that regard. So they wanted to reinstate the USSR, and how they can actually do it without Ukraine. Ukraine been a big force in as a part of USSR. It's been a breadbasket of USSR. We have one of the best soils, so to say, in the world. And we have, of course, a really great human resources in terms of like how our people work, how they think of work. They're like, well, laborers. They like to do the work in terms of like how much you want to like to work. And they just love our country. So USSR can't exist without Ukraine. You may call it like whatever in this terms, like of today's reality, like if it's possible to call it USSR, whatever. It's just how Russia operates and what they want. They want to reinstate this union. Basically, they already more than an empire, so to say. They have so many nations under their control, even though they all tell they're Russians and all this kind of stuff. You can see that they have regions of multiple nationalities and everything. They basically oppressed and took under their control. They have all those small conflicts like Georgia, back to Moldova, Syria, and like Karabakh, where they want to put influence. Afghanistan, of course, they want to put influence anywhere they would dare to or try to, like destabilize those regions, like get a chunk of it, kind of like get all the things all around. And it's a really, really big system of destabilization and how they want to achieve their goals. And they only can achieve them through terror, through suffering, through war, and all those conflicts. Like everything is not that certain, like how their propaganda tells, like all the things how they made it look in 2014 in Ukraine when they started this on the east of Ukraine, when they annexed Crimea and did all those things to destabilize situation in Ukraine. Though we still endured, and we were thinking about they may have their next move in the sleeve. I myself personally also thought about it. I also was a volunteer fighter back in 2014-15. It was a really hard experience in terms of like what's actually going on and how they achieving their goals, with all the propaganda pumping the machines and the guns of the people out there. And of course, they also crossed the border and had their reactive artillery shooting from across the border, which actually was really hard for us to make an answer because there was no open conflict, so to say, and it would be really bad for Ukraine to start like shooting across the border, and they straight out would just like announce war in Ukraine in 2014, and we would be in a really, really bad position. But for recent years, we're built up an army and stuff. It was possible for us and have some means to defend in 2022. So the reasons behind the war for Russia is basically influence and become or reinstate themselves as a big household name in geopolitics, being like the biggest, the best country in the world, whatever you may call it, or you may think they want to think. Basically, what they want you to think about is like how big Russia, how cool Russia, how immensely powerful they are. And in my opinion, that's basically all there is to it. And this is the main reason you can see how Belarus just got under influence of Russia and basically became a, I don't know, a quasi-state of Russia or a part of Russia. They have this, their military basically the same in terms of like access to territories. They have this railway across Ukrainian border. They shooting rockets from Belarus. They had an invasion part from that territory. So they also have a lot of mercenaries in their army from Belarus. They're paying them to join Russian military. And you can see how they achieve their goals and what they do. So I don't think there's much more to it rather than just like reinstate USSR, become back, reinstate themselves as a household, and just be more influential in the world. And that's the main reason. Of course, there are like small reasons and other reasons, but I would think everything they do would fall under that, to reestablish Russia as a like a big imperialist state, like counter to all this like filthy West societies, like how they call it, rotten and really bad. Still, Russians just go and have their vacation in Europe. They're really like impressed of all the West is doing, but they will tell you, oh no, Russia is the best. It's like super good. It's amazing. It's better than everything else out there. We have all this like, I don't know, values like communist, whatever. And this is just how they operate and what they want to do. And if you think about it, it's just one person decision. I would advise you to think more about it and understand that it's a big system and it couldn't function. Even like if you think about like dictatorship regimes and authoritarian regimes, they actually can't exist without people accepting it in terms of supporting it. He has to have a really big circle of people to support it, to pump into it, to be the part of it. And the same goes for a nation. You can't go into a war without like nation supporting it, because if you say like, hey, they don't have a choice, they're forced into it and all this kind of stuff, most of them are willing to do it. It's not nothing like that. They're willing to commit to it because of this like big idea of being like the best, the biggest, the baddest, whatever. And they just want to be part of it, of like that big empire which vastly across the nations, counter to Western societies and Western values, and basically just become a modern version of USSR. And I don't think there's probably much more into it. It's just like, this is the reason. And that's why Ukraine is so important. Ukraine is basically in a place where it's in the middle. So it's part to the west, part to the east. So it's in between those two forces. And whatever Ukraine is, it determines like the thing of how you think of the region. So imagine if Russia would be like, Ukraine would be part of Russia, so we become like modern USSR. It means Russia on the brink, like on the borders of the western part of Europe. So it's really important, and it's really big to have influence there. And then if you go and think, if we have more Western values, if we are pro-Western, if we are a Western country, it means that like NATO and all this kind of stuff by the borders of Russia, and they basically, if people live in the way they live, other people would see like, hey, it's better to live this way, look how good they have everything there, it means maybe we would want to that. And that's something Russia wouldn't want their people to see and understand, that it's better, that it's good, whatever. I mean, at least at this point. And this is the main reason. They just want to reinstate their empire. They want to be powerful. They want to be big, badass. And Ukraine is the key to that, because USSR can't exist without Ukraine. It's been a big part of USSR for so many years. It's been the breadbasket of USSR, with all the rich soils and people as a human resources in terms of how handy they are and how capable they are. And of course all the infrastructure and other things. So this is just it. Like, Russia wants to reinstate USSR, and the plans for that were probably and existed the moment it collapsed. They wanted all those republic back. They had plans of how to get them back under the big roof of Russia empire, whatever. And I don't think there's more about it, because this idea, it fits very well for the masses, to tell that like how you can become big, how can you be proud of your country, of being like so immense and badass. And this is the reason for all this suffering and for war going on, is basically just reinstate the USSR. Of course, it's just my opinion, and that's how I see it, living in Ukraine, living so close to Russians, and seeing the Western values, of course, and how Ukraine was changing over the years as I grew up. And I wouldn't say there are maybe some other reasons. Of course, it's all about the influence, about the power, and this is what Russia wants. It wants to consume Ukraine, subjugate it, as you can hear, like denazification and all this kind of crap is just like a part of a big mechanism they want to use for Russians to hate us and to attack us. And of course, the first thing, Russians themselves, they hate Ukraine because we were able to like maintain a freedom, to be able to define our choices, like good or bad, whatever. We do our mistakes, but we're willing to take them, and we're willing to have a freedom to do them. And they really envy this, that we have this possibility. And of course, it's a possibility we put or like got ourselves. It's nothing that was given to us or whatever. We fought for it, for the ability to determine who we are and where we want to go. And of course, one of the main things for like all the 30 years of independence of Ukraine, we would just say to Russians like, well, get off us. Like, we don't want you. We want to determine what we want ourselves. We don't need your advice. We don't need to think, what do you think? Just like, get lost. And that's it. Don't touch us. We'll know what to do, and we know how to do it. We're willing to take our own risk, make our own decisions and all this stuff. And Russian people really like envy that, the possibility. And that's why all this hatred from Russians toward Ukrainian became possible, because they saw it, and them living in this authoritarian regime were like so proud of their big country, but not really having the things really good their way. They would commit to this, and this idea would work really well for them. So it's all revolves or revives around like reviving USSR, like, and having this really big household Russia empire state, which in case, if you think about it, would be really powerful and really big, and a counter to all the other like big households names. And it would be like a real big prize. That's why they committed so much resources to it. And that's why, of course, I think they wouldn't stop, and they won't stop until they get what they want. So for us, it's, as a nation, it's a survival game, a game to basically independence. And you may think and see that, of course, there are other forces fighting for their agenda, fighting for their own sakes and stuff. All I care is about Ukraine, my own country, and how we can survive through this war and how we can endure as a nation. So we'll fight till the last drop, and so far so good. We're giving a really good fight for them, but this is the main reason. They just want USSR back. They want all this like big Russian empire and have the influence, the biggest influence in the region, and of course being a big influence in the world. So I wouldn't say there are other reasons for them. I mean, of course there are other reasons different, but they are smaller, and in my view they just fall under the same agenda or the same pattern of basically reinstating USSR and having this really big machine of Russia and whatever. So if you have any other questions or ideas, you may ask, of course, in comments. And regarding the channel, I'll be trying to upload some videos of me talking about different stuff, questions and answers. You can drop some comments in the video. And I'll also be trying to upload some videos of actual stuff in the field, and I'll try to keep it as civil as possible, so it will be more of a talking channel and me just giving the thoughts to everything which going on, and hopefully it will help you and give you some information from basically a participant of this event and nothing of a, like, you know, experts out in the field talking different stuff. Still, at the end of the day, it's just my opinion, but you know, I think it's pretty correct. So